A continuous contour line drawing is one where you use a single line for your entire piece. For this, you start off wherever, doesn't really matter, but you don't pick up your pencil the entire time. You want to keep your eye tracing around the image that you're drawing, and this is using hand-eye coordination, so that way wherever your eye moves, that is where your hand is going to move. This is a loose drawing, so it's okay if things aren't exactly perfect. It's probably going to look pretty sketchy. Most likely you'll be omitting most of the very fine details that are in the image. For this cicada, I'm starting with the wing going up and to the left, and then down and to the right until I get the basic shape. And at this point, I'm adding in some shapes that are pretty similar to what's going on in the wing of the cicada, but it's not exactly at all. I am just trying to give that continuous line to give a little bit of visual interest there, and ending back at the bottom of the wing. And next I go and my eye traces down and to the right and along the bottom of the front of that cicada. Here I'm getting the eyes and the top of its head. And you can always pause for a little bit, keep your pencil on the paper, and look over at your image and continue again. That way you're kind of getting your bearing again of where you need to continue next for your drawing. I've backtracked a little bit, and once I did the body, now I'm going through and completing the legs. Again, sometimes backtracking to get back to where I started. And I'm just trying to keep these shapes as similar as I can to where everything is and the correct size on the cicada. But I'm not worried too much if it's not exactly perfect. Here I've looked for where on the kind of sections of the body that I could use that visually as a design to fill space and finish up. For this project, you're going to practice at least 3 different images drawn in a continuous contour style, and this will give you some options for your final piece. You can use one or even a few different of your contour drawings for your final piece, but make sure that your images are fairly different from one another so that way you can get a little bit of practice doing different types of things, but you also might want to keep them within a certain theme, like bugs or plants, something like that. Once you've chosen the contour drawing or drawings that you would like to use for your final piece, you'll cut around them carefully so that way you can see where you want it to be placed on the page. Then you'll begin to divide the background and fill it with different lines and shapes. When you begin to color, you will consider the weight and quality and type of lines that you're using. Are they going to be bold or thin? Will they be dashed or dotted or solid? You might have some shapes that are completely filled in, or that the outline of the shape is done in, again, a bold or a skinny line, maybe dashed like I have here. And play around with this. Don't make it all exactly the same. Check with your notes for different lines and different shapes so that way you can see, some options there if you're having a hard time thinking of them. I also went ahead and started shading in some of those shapes. So the outside edge is darker and it gets lighter towards the center to show that gradient, nice and smooth from dark to light. And I'm doing the same thing here on this second one. And for this one, all of the outside edges are darker and it gets lighter towards the center. You're going to choose one of the color schemes that we learned about the other day. And here I'm using an analogous color scheme where I'm using yellow-orange, orange, and red-orange. So those are all right next to each other on the color wheel. While you're working, you might also want to take your contour drawing and place it back onto your background to see how those lines and shapes are interacting with it, and see if there's anything that you want to add or change or alter before you are finished. Once my background was done, I placed the drawing back on and made sure that everything looked good, and then cut a little extra around the drawing, leaving about a quarter or an eighth of an inch of white space around the edge, so that way I didn't lose any of the drawing itself. Then I used very tiny bits of glue around the edges so that way it would stick nicely, but it wouldn't warp the piece once it was stuck down. Make sure you're not using too much glue on your piece. You can also use more than one of your contour drawings if you'd like. You'll want to place them on the paper first and see how they need to fit before you start working on your background. Here I'm using another analogous color scheme with this lighter bluish green, a dark blue-green, and green. And starting off again with a specific set of shapes. And for these, I'm making them very open shapes with different boldness for the outlines of those shapes. I wanted to keep the negative space empty inside of these shapes and have it kind of mirror how the contour drawings have a decent amount of empty space in them as well. Again, every once in a while, I place my pieces back on the paper to see how that background interacts with them and decide what I want to do next. I also am trying to keep the eye moving around the piece. Some spheres that I have curling up and around the lower right corner to help guide the viewer's eye. Once I felt that my background was completed, I used, again, very small bits of glue around the edges to make sure that everything stayed in place and didn't get warped.